Hi, I'm Leo Llanos with Kinetic. As part of Kinetic Voices, we're delighted to share some insights and ideas on how to approach Campus Live 2024, the ACUHO-I show in June this year. I'm delighted to be joined by three amazing people, a presenter, a longtime attendee and delegate, and an exhibitor. Elizabeth Cox is an experienced executive specializing in leadership management and organizational development. She excels in fostering innovation, collaboration, and continuous improvement with a focus on real estate, student housing, hospitality, and leadership coaching. Thank you, Elizabeth, for joining us. We also have Gerry Kowalski, who is a retired student affairs professional with a distinguished career in campus housing. Known for his mentoring and leadership, he has extensive experience in higher education administration, strategic planning, and student development. Thank you, Gerry, for being here with us. And we also have Max Cannon, who is a campus relations manager for RECRE with a background in business management and STEM. He has expertise in sales, marketing, and operational development, making him a key player in fostering campus relations. Thank you, Max, for being here. So this webinar will be split into three parts: preparing for Campus Live, ideas for during the event, and how to make the most of the event after it's done. So the first section we'll be talking about is preparing for the event. So in your mind, you have Campus Live coming up. What are some things that you do to prepare to get the most value out of the exhibit? Gerry, with your extensive experience in attending, it's only fitting that we start with you. What do you do to prepare?
Well, I think much of what I do, it's similar to what I do in the rest of my career, and that is you have some intention and you have some goals. So, kind of breaking it down, it's IQ, EQ, and technical skills. It's networking, education, and kind of really just getting a sense of where campus housing is at this moment. So, one of the first things I do is to remember who my people are, and then make a list. And the app is wonderful for this to see who's actually in attendance, and I think make some intentional plans to meet those people who you just cannot afford to miss. And if you haven't done it before you leave your campus, do it immediately as you get there. Um, I think some other things, I was always a big business card person. That's the way you build your, information file about people who are in your group. And now I think they have something as part of the app where you can actually kind of exchange digital information via QR code. So I'd say be prepared for that. I'd say also remember that you represent yourself and your institution. And I think that and conduct yourselves accordingly. But be your best self, but also be yourself. I'd say that your conference persona should be who your campus persona is. Um, and I think the other thing that's probably really important is um, the sometimes the conference experience is really good because of your personality type. Extroverts love uh, ACUHO-I campus housing, campus home live. Um, Extroverts have to stretch themselves. So I think you've got to really, and that's why I talk about EQ, because you got to know yourself in terms of what you can and cannot expect of yourself. But either way, if you're an introvert or an extrovert, I think it's important to stretch yourself, and maybe for extroverts to shrink yourself. Um,
Very much so. Elizabeth, you're really great with creating amazing relationships with everybody and just the networking piece of it all. What are your thoughts on that?
I think in preparing for the conference, especially maybe if you've only been to one or this is your first one, I mean, really look at kind of what are the programs you want to go to, but also what are the things outside the programs? What are the socials, the regional socials, the different affinity groups that are meeting? This is a great way also to get involved in the association and to meet with other people. I believe there's also a first-time attendee orientation. Make sure you hit that up as well. And it's really a chance to, even if you're an introvert, you are with your people. I mean, that's the great thing about ACUHO-I is that you've got your kind of your inner core, but really the whole conference should be your people. And so I think that's a really nice way to go up. I've never had anyone reject me going up and saying hello. Right. And I think it's a really nice opportunity to be able to do that. I think the other thing is, make sure, just as Gerry said, look at the schedule and look at what you want to learn, but also take care of yourself, right? Recognizing that going back to back to back programs, I know for executive directors who are paying for that, they don't necessarily want to hear that, but do you need to go to every program slot? Is there a time for you to reflect? How do you plan that out? And how do you, to Gerry's point, you have to know yourself well enough to know, hey, I'm going to be really engaged in the morning and maybe the afternoon I need to pick something a little bit different. So I think those are some ways of just really kind of thinking about, it's an intense few days. And so how do you get the most out of it and what do you want to get out of it?
That's actually a really great insight. Max, as an exhibitor yourself, what are some of the things that you do to prepare for an event like this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as an exhibitor, preparation is everything. And I think this translates between being an exhibitor or an attendee. And I'm bouncing off of Gerry and Elizabeth. Know who's coming, know who your peers are, know who you want to maybe meet for the first time, and who you want to maintain an existing relationship with. A lot of these people we only see once a year and maybe exchange a few emails. And so it's really important to use this time in person to reconnect and maintain relationships or build new ones. So I think knowing what sessions you want to go to is important and knowing what you want to learn and take out of the conferences, but just as importantly, knowing who you want to connect with and what networking opportunities there are. The other vendor perspective I want to share is as an attendee, it can be obvious to look at the sessions and look at the people who are coming, but maybe what isn't as obvious is looking at the vendors who are coming. Know who you want to talk to, know who your campus is already partnered up with, and make a connection with those people, whether you're the executive director or a residence advisor or a coordinator. Meet the people who your campus is working with, introduce yourself, they're going to welcome you, and kind of be prepared to do that, as well as make a short list of the cool new things that you want to introduce and bring back. Look at that list, see what's interesting, and bring that back to your leadership when we talk about the post-show follow-up.
Very much so. Gerry, has there ever been like any challenges for you in preparation for Campus Live?
Oh, absolutely. I think that the daily grind and the regular schedule, and the last minute emergency that crops up. I mean, I think for a lot of campuses, you know, they're in the middle of room assignment, room selection, and so that can be a great distractor. And for facilities people, it's all the summer projects. For people who are in conferences, they're over their heads. So I think that the challenge is finding the quiet time, the intentional time to do that preparation. And it really, I mean, the way it's set up now with the app, I think it's actually pretty easy. But I think Max said it right. Preparation is everything. If you're spending a lot of time preparing, it's going to make the experience better. I think Lincoln said if he had 8 hours to cut down a tree, he'd spend 6 hours sharpening the saw. So I think that I think that kind of preparation is really important. But understand that And maybe the way you manage that challenge, Leo, is to say, don't try to do it 3 days before the conference.
Right.
Do it a month ahead of time. Now, maybe the app isn't up at that point in time, but you can do some of the other kind of planning, and the schedule's available, so you can look at the programs. You kind of have a sense of who's probably going to be there from an exhibitor perspective. So there aren't limitations to that. I think the last several days prior to your leaving should be when you're kind of tying a bow on all of your other preparations.
Yeah, I think, it's funny, Gerry, that you say that, because I also think about the who's going from your campus.
Yeah.
And what that plan is, because sometimes you may be the only person from your campus, or it may be there's a larger group. And this actually, I think one of the things, kind of that preparation, is having a conversation with your colleagues on campus about, hey, are we traveling together? What does this look like? Are we having dinner together? Are we all doing our own thing? I think for some, sometimes I think we take that for granted, those kind of pre-conference conversations. And so you don't know, especially if you're an entry-level professional, or if this is your first time attendee, you're not sure how are you supposed to balance kind of your own team versus kind of the conference itself. And so that can be a challenge. So I think working that out. I also have a practical challenge, and that is packing, right? What to wear,
Yeah.
right? And I think that, and I'll say this from a different perspective, but I think comfortable shoes are really important. That you're going to be doing a lot of walking. And I think it's important, to what Gerry said before, you want to be your best self and be who you are. So if you want to dress to the nines and that's your best comfortable self, go for it. If you're more business casual, that's fine too. I think it's really, but my number one tip is comfortable shoes. You need to wear comfortable shoes.
And it's funny. I feel like a lot of people overlook that, is how you're going to dress and make sure that you take comfortability into account, because most people just show up and, they want to look nice, they want to look presentable, or what have you, but they never take into account this could last a while. And, it's a lot of walking, a lot of standing, and they kind of, overlook it. And before you know it, you're kind of just like, wow, I wish I would have thought about this before. But you're so busy planning, you're so busy looking at other things or whatever, which is fine, but make sure you take that into account, because otherwise you might regret it.
It's true. Those convention centers are big.
Yeah, I think piggybacking on what Elizabeth just said about comfortability, I think the other thing that that team going is, I think it's important to show institutional pride. And so I think that, for your team, maybe it's a day that you're all wearing the same polos or whatever. But I always felt like, it was important to rep the institution. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, the University of Georgia national champions. I mean, obviously that might even be an overstatement, but I think, I think people will look and say, are you there for yourself? Are you there for the institution? Are you there for both? And I think the answer needs to be both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any other things that you do in preparation, Elizabeth, that maybe perhaps you at one point overlooked, and now you're like, I think that this is an easy mistake to make, and I wish I would have known this sooner?
I think it's understanding. So I'm a presenter, so I have the privilege of presenting. And I think from a presenter perspective, it's understanding your presentation style, right? And so understanding if you need to practice and know your presentation and have it down, you're not going to do that the day before your presentation, especially if your presentation's on the second or third day of the conference. So I think that's something that, I think that took me a little while to understand, especially if you're co-presenting and you and your co-presenter have different presentation styles. So making sure that you understand where you are. This is also just my personality. I find myself often looking at my presentation 10 minutes before just to make sure. I tell myself not to change anything, but I'm always having ideas and always iterating and trying to think of, just to get myself kind of in game mode, so to speak. So it goes back to the theme here of kind of knowing yourself. But that would be my advice, is that if you don't want to have to worry about your presentation before your presentation, make sure that it's done and dusted, as they say, before you get on the airplane or get in the car or the boat or the train, however you're traveling. And if not, then just make yourself sure you have time and Wi-Fi to
Yes.
to clean it
Yes.
up.
Very much
Before.
so.
I know this. I know this sounds really, really simplistic, but when my wife and I travel, we have a list of
Yeah.
like immediate things I've got to check off. And you don't want to forget something. So make yourself a list of those things that are absolutely essential that you have to have, and double check it before, the day before you leave.
Yes, because
Yeah,
there's no going
especially
back.
Exactly, especially if this is, I mean, some of us, it's a very exciting time because this is both a business trip, but maybe it's a new city we've never been to before as well. And so packing for vacation and packing for business travel is a little bit different. And so I think that's a really good point of saying kind of what are the things I need versus what are the things that I want, and get those done. And put a sticky on if you pack early, put a sticky outside your bag to know what you put in that bag so you don't forget. Not that I've done that on my last trip. So
You know what? That's a good piece of advice. I might have to steal that from you, Elizabeth, because that's a really
yeah,
good one.
yeah,
Everything for me usually lives on my notes app. And so
yeah.
I that's where my list is, and I just double check everything, triple check everything, just to make sure I'm not forgetting anything, because no matter how many times you check it, you're probably going to forget something anyway. So I'm just very just on top of that always. But all right, one last question. That you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice in preparation for an event. What would that advice be? And let's start with Max.
Yeah, this is a really good question. The biggest piece of advice that I would give myself is, and this is interesting coming from a vendor perspective, but is to be more prepared talking about my role and responsibility within my institution. I think this is something I wanted to share because it has a lot of overlap. When I deliver my product, I want to be prepared to talk to a variety of different people, and I think this applies to the attendees as well. Being prepared to talk about your institution at a high level, especially to the vendors, because that's what they're there to do, is to learn about you and learn about your campus. And so preparing more than just what you're bringing, but what your campus as a whole is bringing, so that you can answer these kind of tough, prodding questions from the vendors.
That's actually a really, really good one. Elizabeth, any advice that you would give yourself in preparation for an event?
I think it's, don't be afraid to experience things that scare you a little bit. I think, whether that's going up to someone who you see as like a pillar of the profession, right? I think that's, or to go to a presentation that has nothing to do with your current roles and responsibilities, but just is super interesting to you. I think that's really, for me, I think it's the whole thing can be very overwhelming. It's not as overwhelming as your first time in a Buc-ee's, but it can be overwhelming. And so I think you're in a brave space. So I think I would do things to that scare me a little bit, and kind of take me to my learning edge.
Really good one. Gerry, how about yourself?
I would say that I think there's more time needed in preparation to understand the personal you and the professional you. Um, there's the way that you speak professionally in staff meetings, and how you communicate in email and those kinds of things. And then there's the casual you that is just, and this is going to be during all the downtime. And I think what's interesting is that there are probably times when you're thinking you should be your personal self, but you really should be professional, and vice versa. So there's this really fine tightrope that you've got to walk. But then, because what comes into that is your authenticity. And I think that's probably one of the things that people appreciate most about long-term relationships. They know that the Elizabeth Cox that I'm going to see after how many years now? 14, Elizabeth,
Yeah,
something like
something
that.
like that. Yeah. Gosh.
That I saw at the University of Georgia first is going to be the same Elizabeth Cox I see in a week and a half. So I think that's a really, but it's a really that's something I think you also need to give yourself some grace on too. I mean, you're probably gonna think that you should be the personal you, but you really should be professional, and you mess it up, and then forgive yourself. I mean, just move on. It's there's like I said, there's strive for ideal. There's nothing perfect.
That's right. Oof.
Yes. I think that the underlying theme of all of this is yes, make sure that you prepare and make sure you have a list. And like Elizabeth, that I'm going to steal this idea, make sure you have sticky notes because you just never know. You want to make sure that you just don't forget anything because, as I told Gerry, it's once you've left, there's no going back, right? So you want to make sure that you have it all down because for a lot of people, it's also in a new city they've never been. And so they want to make sure they prepare also for the things that they're doing outside of the show as well. But it is important to give yourself that patience, give yourself that grace to know that it's going to be okay and that to just be yourself when you're there, and it's not gonna you're there to have fun, so just don't overstress it too much. Like anything else, just make sure that you're yourself and you've done the best that you can in preparation for everything, and if something happens, it always works itself out. That's exactly what I always think to myself. It always works out. Did it work out the way you had it intended? No, but like Gerry said, there's a difference between ideal and perfect. Great insights, everybody, in preparation for the show. It is crucial to make sure that you maximize your time and opportunities when you're there. So stay tuned for the next part where we'll be discussing how to make the most of your time during the show.